A warm welcome to all. I am Sneha, the management head of Genesis.
And I am Srinivas from Genesis.
It is a request to all of you to fasten your seatbelts as today we have Dr. Debojyoti Chakravarti and Dr. Soumya Sharma who shall take us on a drive through of the technology CRISPR and its applications. A senior scientist by profession, Dr. Chakravarti at CSIR, Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology, New Delhi, heads an RNA biology group. He is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Biological Sciences, Academy of Scientific and Innovative Research. The conclusion of his master's in molecular biology was from West Bengal University of Technology, Kolkata, and thereafter he earned his PhD from Max Planck Institute of Molecular Cell Biology and Genetics in Dresden under Frank Buchholz. He has been a postdoctoral researcher in biotechnology Zentrum and medical faculty at Technical University Dresden. His extensive interests are development of CRISPR-Cas9 based tools for ex vivo, iPSC, and in vivo base editing, therapeutic genome engineering. He is also currently studying determinants of brain development using cerebral organoids and a mechanistic understanding of novel determinants of embryonic stem cell fate. He has published the article CRISPR-Cas9, a new tool for gene therapy in American Cancer Society. EMBO, European Molecular Biology Organization, Young Investigator and Young Scientist Award by Indian National Science Academy are the notable awards claimed by Dr. Chakravarti in recent years. He possesses a nomination for Wellcome Trust Early Career Fellowship 2016 and Inspire Faculty Award 2015. We also have Dr. Soumya Sharma, who is a PhD student at Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology, CSIR. She has completed her BSc in Life Sciences from Miranda House College and then went on to earn a master's degree in biotechnology from the South Asian University. She is working towards developing a brain disease model from patient-derived iPSCs and correcting the disease-causing mutation with the help of CRISPR-Cas9 system at Dr. Debojyoti Chakravarti's lab. Her research interest lies in understanding the role of the non-coding region of the genome, interspersed by the coding region, and the regulation and development of organism. Now, let's move on to understanding CRISPR-Cas9 from Dr. Chakravarti, followed by Dr. Soumya Sharma. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Sneha, and thanks the organizing team for inviting both of us. It's a pleasure and it's an honor. Just before we start, are the audience today mostly undergraduate students, BSc students, MSc students, or are they PhD students? What is the level?
So we have it from all the spheres that you mentioned. We have it from all the spheres, basically. Because there is also live streaming, so yeah, everyone is.
Good. So, so the pattern of discussion as well as the talk today would be a little bit different. I would not be really doing the speaking today. The speaking would be done by Soumya, who is a pretty senior PhD student who is working with me. I would give a brief introduction about what CRISPR is, what we are doing, and then she will tell you a little bit about how she is using this technology for her specific biological question. So, the year 2020 has been a very, it has brought a lot of change in almost everybody's lives, right? It's still not over. We are still getting used to how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected us in every sphere, and science, perhaps it is one of those spheres which has actually benefited, if one might say, from this whole pandemic situation. The year 2020 also saw the Nobel Prize in Chemistry given to two outstanding biochemists, Professors Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier. And 2020 is not just a year of women in science, but it is also a year of women in almost every sphere. Right? If you look at the politics, if you look at how things have shaped up in different countries, how different political leaders, women political leaders particularly, have handled the pandemic perhaps even better than the male counterparts. So it has been really a championing of women in every sphere. Interestingly, my lab is also, I would say, almost 70 to 80% women scholars, PhD students, postdocs, and so on. And they are doing fantastic work in the field of CRISPR biology in their own ways, in different components where they are using this technology. And I'm really proud to have Soumya here today. One of the things that you forgot to, probably you have not aware of, is that she is also a Fulbright Scholar nominee. So she is very soon going to go to the US to complete a part of her work. And it's, the reason why this is a very, 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 how to say, prestigious award. And it's something that's very competitive. And the reason why she made it this far is because she has been doggedly pursuing her own research question, sometimes without very little, little effort from the side of the other students or the other the major interest in the lab. So that's, I think that tells a lot about how committed she is to her work, and also how in general, we are at a situation where we can ask questions that were almost impossible to ask even just 10 years back. What she will be telling about is how CRISPR is being used in understanding a neurodevelopmental disease. Like I said, that the two individuals, Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, discovered the CRISPR system. Or rather, they didn't discover the CRISPR system, but rather they uncovered that you can actually use a complex of a protein from bacteria, which is called the Cas9 protein, and an RNA, which together form what is known as a ribonucleoprotein complex, to selectively target DNA very, very precisely. And then this can be adapted later on to make changes in the DNA. So the story of CRISPR actually started very long time back. It was in the 1980s. If I can, suggest to you, there is a very nice documentary which is available. I think it's called The Human. I'll share the link. I'll share the name later on. If someone remembers it, she can also tell it. Yeah, so it's a documentary which actually spans the entire spectrum of what CRISPR based technologies can do and where it actually originated. And interestingly, it is the combined effort of a lot of scientists, both basic and translational, who have actually led to development of the CRISPR tool, which is like a game changer in almost every field. Incidentally, there is really hardly a field which is not touched by CRISPR, whether it is in physics or whether it's in chemistry or even far off fields. CRISPR is being used in the International Space Station for specific experiments. CRISPR is being used in defense, and more recently, I think we and several others have shown that you can actually combat the coronavirus crisis with CRISPR, using it as a diagnostic. And of course, the biggest challenge and the biggest applicability of CRISPR is in therapy, where you can potentially get rid of diseases. And here we are talking about curing genetic diseases as opposed to just preventing them. So it's a long way that it has gone. It started in the 80s from some very minor observations by certain individuals, till 2020 right now, and 21 actually, where we are using CRISPR for very advanced technologies. I can give you a little bit of a flavor. You would probably hear about it very soon. But CRISPR now has also been used to not only diagnose the coronavirus, presence of coronavirus in a sample. We have a flagship product called Feluda, which is a FN-Cas9 editor-linked uniform detection assay, where we adapted a CRISPR technology to identify the SARS-CoV-2 signature in patient samples. But now CRISPR can actually be used to identify very specifically the UK variant. And you might be hearing about the UK variant a lot in news and how deadly it can potentially be, and how several countries have gone into lockdown and are sequencing, like anything, to identify this variant. There is a possibility that we might have actually developed a technology which can detect this variant without the need for sequencing. I think you'll hear a lot about it in the coming days. But I think today the main talk, or the main story that you're going to hear about is about an ongoing collaboration with All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and Soumya will talk about that. Again, these are diseases that are really do not have a cure. And in India, there are a lot of such diseases which constitutes what is known as rare diseases, because they happen. They are not very common among the population. But when you look at the Indian population and the length and breadth of it, even these rare diseases are afflicting a lot of people. So she's going to talk about a brain disorder and how every specific disorder requires a specific solution. How you cannot use a simple microscope to look at a cell and a nucleus. You need a very specific microscope for that. Similarly, every scientific problem requires a very specific solution. And she's also going to talk about the solutions that she has developed for this particular problem. So I will give it over to Soumya, and I'm like I said that it's a really proud moment for me that she's going to talk today to you about her work, and I wish her all the best.
Thank you.
I might just add that she is not a doctor yet, but very
Yes. Okay. So now I am here presenting the image of how Adam was created by Michael D'Angelo. So I have just put it in a manner that the brain is actually responsible for the creation of the discovery of the genome editing tool, and in return, this tool is being used to dissect the intricacies of the brain, how it functions. So, what is genetic engineering? So, as I see you guys are from NIT, you are very well versed with your friends, and you yourself probably from engineering background. People who are creating various forms of things and materials out of this engineering as a field. So, for genome engineers, it is about editing the genome, probing the nucleotides, and to see what the result is out from it. So another thing is what genetic engineering is and should be not is the uh, basically the ethical concern that has arisen, that people are just becoming mad, crazy scientists, and they are working towards creating ideal organisms with high IQ, with good looks, and are playing with the nature of law, with the laws of nature. Sorry. So. As this cartoon depicts that the genome engineer, he tried to cure a disease but resulted into a monstrous occurrence into the human being. It correlates well with the recent report wherein a Chinese scientist was known to uh, unethically edit the genome of a baby in order to cure a particular disease without proper ethical validation. So this is just like I'm giving a brief overview, and then I'll go through what all CRISPR or the genome editing is about. So to lay the foundation, let me just start with this thing. So CRISPR-Cas technology, I noticed it upcoming in pop culture. So what happened was, like, you're working in the lab, you're working with the technology, and over the weekend or during night when you get free earlier, you scroll through cinema and you see the terms that you are working with. It's really heart touching. It's really like heart touching. So let me just play this small clip. So I think it's icebreaker enough for all of us. So the technology is very well entertaining. very well there in the pop culture. And there was this movie also, Rampage, wherein they showed that the scientists tried to play with with CRISPR-Cas technology, and it resulted in gigantic animals that were attacking throughout the city and causing rampage. So basically, genome engineering, it has recently become the talk of town, but it has been around since a long time back. So it started with usage of various nucleases. So the restriction nucleases that are there. So there are various enzymes that actually cut the DNA, and you use it for cloning the DNA segment from one to the other. They have been around for quite a while. So these meganucleases, zinc finger nucleases, talons, they have all developed over a period of time. So they have worked as a foundation over which the rest of the research got developed. So from 2012, there was this boom in this genome engineering with the advent of this CRISPR-Cas technology. So what it actually is, so basically prokaryotes already have it in them. So what researchers do is that they look again for the things that are already there. So let me start with an example. Today in the morning, I forgot where I kept my glasses. So I just scrolled around. I just thought where I had been and all the places I had been to. And then it's sort of like a research, like I already had some clues in my mind. I had been to the cupboard, I had been to the almirah. So all those places I looked for. So same is what researchers do. They look for the clues through the knowledge that they have acquired over a period of time. So the prokaryotes, certain bacteria, they already have this CRISPR-Cas system in them. And what scientists did was they probed into the overall mechanism and adapted it for usage. So whenever a pathogen called bacteriophage attacks a certain class of bacteria, they have advised an adaptive immune response against it. So they have actually evolved it over a period of time. So they take up the segments of the DNA and they have it in their genome into a certain array. So when this array gets transcribed into certain RNA sequences called crRNA, and in conjugation with another RNA molecule, they act as a guide to particular bacteria, the pathogenic sequences upon secondary attack. So what happens is when the bacteriophage attacks again, the bacteria itself is immune towards it, and it just prevents its this attack from happening again. So as the last year's Nobel Prize made this CRISPR-Cas system talk of the town, and everyone had it in their mind that what is it, and we had various conferences, and probably this conference is also a result of that. So this is that. So basically CRISPR-Cas system is divided into two classes, class 1 and 2, where class 1 is made up of components that are multi-subunit effector complexes. So they are quite complicated. They need multiple proteins to come together and therefore result in the genome editing. And whereas in class 2, there is one single protein effector module that is just a single protein that has certain motifs responsible for various activities at once. So this is the class 2 system that is well studied and well taken advantage of for genome engineering purposes. So I'll be talking about this type 2 of class 2, Cas9. So for editing the genome, there is this protein. Let me just look for the pointer. Okay, so there is this protein called Cas9 that is translated out from these bacterial array itself, but they have now been repurposed to be purified in the lab itself. So Cas9 protein along with the guide RNA, when they conjugate, they have this ability to target the genomic locus depending upon a particular sequence reads. So they look for basically this PAM motif, and they sit on top of the genomic DNA, and this guide RNA has homology with the DNA element. It binds with the DNA and creates double-stranded breaks. So these double-stranded breaks are like a ligated DNA strand breaking apart, and the two main pathways that are further taken up is non-homologous end joining, wherein the DNA's the cell's repair machinery, it tries to have a hit and trial of repair, and it mostly results into insertions or deletions or frame shifts at times. And most of the times when the system does not work well, there is this perfect repair that happens. So what researchers have taken this NHEJ mechanism, the help of this NHEJ mechanism is for the creation of knockouts of various types. So they have a particular gene of interest, they perform NHEJ over it, and knockouts can be created out from it. And then there is homology directed repair, wherein if you give a donor template, so suppose I want my DNA to now have an information that it should glow upon it being expressed. I can put a glowing protein, the gene for a glowing protein, say GFP, and it will act as a donor, bearing certain homology with the region that has been broken. And the homology directed repair will ensure that there is a precise edit that would have happened, that would have incorporated that glowing signal into the genomic element. So this is basically used for creating knock-ins. So this CRISPR-Cas system has various applications. So as I said, for creating knockouts, for transcription, repression, and activation. So this CRISPR-Cas system is basically making double-strand breaks. So when you perform mutation in the protein itself, so that it does not cut, it just sits at that region, and then it just prevents the further proteins to be over there, and therefore either repress its transcription at all, or probably it can recruit other so you can have certain motifs attached to that protein, and it will help in either repression or activation of the gene of the target gene. So then there is epigenetic modification. You can again have the protein modified in a manner so that it recruits certain machinery that epigenetically modifies the surrounding genome. And then you can also use this system to create a library of knockouts. So out from which you can screen which gene is responsible for which phenotype. And then generation of animal models. So the way you incorporate the way you create knockouts or incorporate knock-ins of certain genes, you can actually create models out from this system. And then you can also use the system for imaging. So you can have a glowing sort of motif attached to this protein, and when it sits on top of the gene of interest, it can actually cause the glowing of that particular locus. So then talking about dissecting the intricacies of brain using CRISPR-Cas system. So as we all know that brain is highly inaccessible, it is quite well shelled. And if you want to probe into the elements of brain, you need to take into account that the process would be highly invasive and mostly painful for the patient. So we need for ways that can help in this probing process so it should be much easier. So how to go about it is through okay, so let's just first see how there were developments in the field of neuroscience. So this particular graph, it is in regard to Alzheimer's, but it goes in general as well for neuroscience. So during early 20th century, there were developments in histology, proceeding with developments in biochemistry, genetics, and brain imaging. And in between this 2000 to 2020, there was this development of this field of reprogramming the cells derived from a patient or a human being, called iPSC technology. So you can take my skin cells and use those specific set of reprogramming factors and turn them into pluripotent state. So that pluripotent state would result in creation of various forms that so if suppose my skin cell has made a set of iPSCs, those iPSCs can then be grown into creating the brain, which is isogenic to me, or even retina, or even various other organ types that can be created. So this was what happened first, and then it resulted into the boom in this field of neuroscience research with respect to organoid research. So basically what researchers did was they took up iPSCs and they created brain structures out from them. So this gives a gist of the developments in this particular field. So it grew from an organotypic culture to a self-assembling organoids. So these are the structures that actually are now helping researchers to study and probe into the brain without actually uh, invasively probing with the patient's brain. So how the 3D neural structures are made is, so what I do for my work is I take blood derived from patient, I reprogram it to iPSCs, and those iPSCs can then be taken up uh, to make various other organ types. So in my case, I have proceeded with creating this 3D structure called spheroid. So here you can see those iPSCs can be turned into 3D structures called embroid bodies, and upon their evolution, they can be grown into various forms of brain structures. You can have those evolution in a directed manner or an undirected manner. So when it is undirected, it mostly results into a cerebral organoid. So it is the natural tendency of cells to be evolved into these cerebral structure bearing the cortical neurons. And when you have certain triggers to it, it can be guided into specific specialized brain regions. So you can have these spheroids and you can assemble them together and see the interaction of these various structures happening when in contact with each other. So this 3D brain organoid actually helped in this field of neuroscience. It helped in studying congenital brain malformations, in understanding major psychiatric disorders, in dissecting the neurodegenerative diseases, in compound screening of these various molecules that actually we cannot study over the brain, but we can take these organoids and actually study individual components and finalize a few candidates that can serve as prospective drug targets or yeah. So, and then we can also study human evolution by creating organoids of one species, one form of species, and comparing it with the other species. So when the two fields get together, what you get is these iPSCs growing into organoids, and they are basically called brain in a dish in a very informal way. So those can be used for high throughput drug screening, and we can have discovery of various small molecules that can target various pathways, and therefore we can dissect the pathways as well, and then diagnostic testing. So basically it can translate into a development of a drug that is close to how the person would react to that particular drug in a dish, and and hopefully in in the organism level as well. So there are various ethical concerns over the proceedings of brain organoid research. So scientists question the fact that are these brain conscious enough? Are they able to think on their own? So there is this person, Dr. Alison Mutry from University of California, San Diego. I just mentioned that he can be called Elon Musk of brain organoid research, because he's very famous in this field. He has sent these brain organoids to space and is studying how the development occurs in microgravity. He has made these brain structures interact with robotic elements and probably amalgamating the field of artificial intelligence with this developing field of brain organoid research. With the output of his work had been like that, just shook this ethicist was there was this wave formation in the brain, so there neuronal firing that could be captured, and those ethicists question that if that is happening, probably those brain organoids are conscious in themselves, and we need to sit back and actually think it over whether we are proceeding with these type of research based or models in a thoughtful manner or not. So for in-depth reading, you can go through these two links and read further that what all are the diseases that are taken up for these taking help of these CRISPR-Cas technology with these organoid-based models. So now I'll go ahead with my project. So I had taken this particular disease called MLC. It is a mouthful of words. It stands for megalencephalic leukoencephalopathy with subcortical cyst. It is a rare genetic disorder, and it is known to be famous in the Indian Agrawal community, and not famous, like it is a rare disease. Not many people are aware of it. I myself got acquainted with it while pursuing PhD. So MLC is a childhood disease in which there is an enlargement of brain that occurs, leukodystrophy because there is abnormal growth in the brain's white matter, and there are cysts that are formed at the brain, at the various regions of the brain, basically the subcortical region. So these are the two researchers who are pioneers in this field, Dr. Mario van der Naap from Netherlands and Dr. Bhimsen Singhal from India. They are the ones who pioneered in the field of dissecting this particular disease. So it is a rare inherited autosomal recessive form of child. So, okay, it's a leukodystrophy. So the brain's white matter, the myelin and all, they have certain malformations, and therefore the what eventually happens is the brain is unable to fire signals properly. There is retention of water, and therefore edema or swelling due to water retention occurs. So it is divided into three types, type 1, 2, and 2 of various forms. One is due to mutation in this particular gene called MLC1, the other two due to mutations in another gene called glial cam. So I'll just quickly go through. This is a slide I had made in the morning only. So I was not aware that the crowd would be PhD students as well. So there are mutations present in these two genes that result into this particular disorder. And basically this MLC gene is present in astrocytes, the specialized cells of brain, which are known to be as the housekeepers of brain's functionality. So these genes, when they are disturbed, they cause the imbalance in ionic, they cause an imbalance in ionic environment, and therefore water is retained, and therefore this disease is there. So MLC1, glial cam, they have various levels of prevalence. So major is MLC1 gene, which is the precursor of this particular disease, and this is what I am also studying for my PhD project. So now I'll stick to, I'll now talk about the non-human models of MLC that are already there. So why even I'm going about thinking of modeling it into 3D structures. So already there are models which are made up of knocking down this gene in rats. So it had been observed that the astrocytes of rat, they had these vacuoles that are the key hallmarks of this particular disease. But these were not, so okay, I'll talk about a few more. Then there is knockouts of this particular gene that also recapitulates some sort of another of this particular disorder. And here you can see that in wild type and MLC1 null brain, the there is difference in the wet weight and the wet weight of the two types of brain. So the null MLC1 null brain is a bit higher in volume, or you can say density, than the wild type brain. And then there are nullified versions in zebrafish also that actually showed that the brain volume increased in the knockouts. So why am I even thinking of creating models when there are already models present? It is because the in vitro and in vivo models are not compatible. There are various features that are there in the in vivo model that cannot be recapitulated in the in vitro model. And the in vivo models also that are there, the zebrafish, the mouse that I talked about, they are also not sufficient because they do not reflect the severity of this particular disorder as close to the human counterparts. So, since MLC is a rare disease, it is overlooked, and because of its low prevalence rate in the population, the models that I've created, they can recapitulate, but not to completion. Then the brain lesions that are found, they are not recapitulated by the in vivo models because of interspecific variations. So human brain is different. Therefore, we need to have a close to human model of this particular disease. And therefore, I come to the point that I am creating these 3D structures. So as I said, these iPSCs are evolved into these specialized 3D structures. If I have a disease patient and I create 3D structure out from it, I should be able to recapitulate the features that are prevalent in the human brain. So that is what I am aiming towards in my PhD. And comparing this particular disease model with gene corrected, so CRISPR Cas9 corrected version would help me in understanding the differences. So these 3D brain organoid models that are already prevalent, they have to reflect these myelination issues. So the myelination, it occurs after a particular period of time in a human's life, and already available models that were there could not generate could not form myelin. So I had to look forward to various protocols available. Also, since this MLC gene is present at the end feet of astrocytes, so astrocytes that are interacting with blood vessels, they have to be there. So these organoids do not have vasculature. So this can be one of the impediment of my work. So therefore, I'll have to first of all look for the recapitulation of myelination defect and then go for the issue of addressing the issue of absence of vasculature in my model. So a new protocol is needed. So to go about it, went through a lot of protocols that are already available, and I selected a few that had all the features I needed to see in my model. So this protocol mentions, so it is a bit complicated. I'll just skim through it. So it is called oligocortical spheroid model. So you have certain molecules that push the self-evolving cells into a lineage that would eventually result into myelination event happening. So there is this field of RNA transcriptomics called single cell analysis, wherein these organoid structures or even brain, each single cell's RNA profile is studied through, and they are allocated a specific cluster. So when comparing the clusters that are present in the week 12 organoid with the fetal brain single cell clusters, they could see that this particular protocol that I am adapting actually bears glial cluster that will result into myelination. So it is good to go. And so I just want to talk about this particular Pham et al. Study wherein they had co-cultured these vasculature forming tissues with the brain organoid, and they could see the infiltration of these brain tissues with this vasculature, and therefore the brain that had grown out, the 3D brain that had grown out of it actually was a bit bigger, and it did not have necrosis due to lack of oxygen happening. So this is like well ahead of time, so not part of my research work yet. So, but there are labs that are specialized in this field and they are adapting it quite well. So patient-derived or gene-corrected iPSCs can be formed into brain organoid, and then those organoids can be studied and compared together, and hopefully can also be used for screening various drug targets to for therapeutic purposes. So with this, I would like to thank my lab group. And yes.
Okay, thank you, Soumya. for for the very nice presentation and explaining your work. If you have any questions for Soumya, please go ahead. Or in general, if you have questions about.
Yes, we do have a lot of questions, but before that, ma'am, please pardon us. We were not aware about your accomplishments, so we couldn't mention it during your introduction.
It's fine, fine.
And also, congratulations. And we hope you are safe travel to the US.
Thank
We
you.
now move on to the pleasure. We now move on to the next Q&A session. So the first question is from Yuvraj, and it is: could you please elaborate on how the different strains of COVID-19 could be identified using CRISPR?
So I'll take this because I think the rest of them Soumya can probably take. So the different strains of COVID-19 are actually mutations that the virus has picked up during its passage, throughout organisms. It has now spread across the world. So as it goes from one person to another, and there is selection pressure and there are mutations that are happening, the virus also begins to take up mutations. Some of these are, in fact, most of them, 90% of or more, do not really impact how the virus actually regulates its own life cycle and so on. But there are certain mutations which has made this virus, if one can say, stronger and more resilient. So and are also causing more infectivity. And these are the mutations of concern. Currently, the only way that these mutations can be detected is by sequencing these patient samples, deep sequencing them, and then looking for these mutations in the patient samples. Now, if you are aware of sequencing, you know that this is a very long process. Generally takes a couple of days, and the cost is high, and it is a lot of data to look for to find out a single point mutation which the virus might have got, which makes it not something that you would routinely do in order to diagnose, because you are imagining you are doing RT-PCR tests where you are trying to isolate people who have a variant and you want to keep them quarantined. So if you're doing such kind of tests, then it is not possible to really have a 36-hour or 40-hour time window to actually track people who are carrying these variants. So CRISPR has the ability to actually use, like Soumya might have said before, that the protein can go and specifically interact with DNA. So if this protein, Cas protein, or a version of it which we are using is highly specific to figuring it out whether a particular DNA sequence that it interacts with has a mutation or not, and this mutation is corresponding to the virus, then you can convert that readout into some kind of a signal, and that signal can tell you in a binary fashion whether that variant is present in your sample or not. So that's how we have repurposed the CAS system that we are using in the lab. We have used for Feluda as well, to make sure that it can actually give a signal when it encounters a virus with a mutation versus when it finds a virus with the normal wild type sequence. So that's how the CRISPR the COVID-19 is being identified using CRISPR. Yeah, I think the next question is more legal, ethical issues. When it involves CRISPR, we do whatever we want with the body. Technically, it is doing right. Do you believe more when there's little to? So it's ethics are man-made, right? Legal things are also man-made, and they keep on evolving over time, based on what is necessary, what is right, and what should be done. Right. So the CRISPR the field of CRISPR has actually started new ethical considerations to be put into place. If 10 years back somebody would have told you that we could change the DNA in an organism, nobody would have believed that there would not be an ethical question or a question of ethics for that matter. It is because the technology is right now there, that is why people have started debating it. And the question really is that, to what extent CRISPR can be used and who should use it. We get a lot of mails from children or parents of children who have only, let's say, 5 years to live or 6 years to live, for example. And their parents really want a treatment that can elongate the life for 5 years or let's say 10 years more. And they would not be the ones who would say that draw the line in front of my kid. of not using CRISPR for treatment. Similarly, there are people who might come and say that, well, look, if there is a possibility that I can have, a fair skin, or using CRISPR, although that's still quite a far away research also, to identify the genes responsible for that. Or let's say I want to have a blue eye, because my it looks makes me look good. Then the question is that if a person who can pay for that is able to get that and make a mark in whatever way, versus a person who is unable to pay for that because it's a technology which is going to be expensive. How does one control that? This is more like beautification. It's like plastic surgery, and there would be CRISPR plastic surgeries probably sometime in the future. So ethics evolve. Ethics evolve because of there is more discussion and there is more dialogue, and the more and more one has these discussions, particularly with young people, with young students like we are having right now, the more challenges will be thrown at the legislators to frame laws that can serve both the scientists as well as the people who are going to be benefited or not benefited by CRISPR.
So we can now move on to the next question. Yeah, I'll just read the
Yeah,
question.
I think Soumya can take the next ones. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, yes. So the next question is from Om, and he's asking, to how much extent do these organoids replicate the actual organs of a human body?
So the thing is that all the signatures that are present in the organs, they are actually there in the organoids as well. So they are not like the exact replica of the organ, but they bear all the trademarks that are there. So we do not call them a replacement for those organs yet. So, but there are like developments wherein people are working towards transplantation. So there is this liver transplantation that can be taken up, and these pancreatic cells that can be corrected and then that can be injected or infiltrated into the region so that it can now bear the healthy health that it can give out the healthy form of insulin or like insulin at all. So
Let's move on to the next question. This question is from Saurat Ali. Are there any chances that CRISPR-Cas9 will be used in treating cancer cells?
So it is in concept used for treating cancer cells, but the proceedings have not reached that far that it used. So there are various suicide genes that are actually incorporated into the cancerous cells with the help of CRISPR technology. And what they do is, whichever cells bear certain trademarks of these cancer mutations, that suicide gene kills off those cells, and therefore the cancerous niche which also bears similarity to the stem cell niche, can be specifically eliminated. But it is like in talks about being used clinically, but not yet. So it can be used.
Okay, all right. So I hope Sharat has got her reply. And the next question we have is from Yogesh. In the treatment of MLC using the CRISPR technology, how do they ensure that the patient's existing cognitive abilities are not compromised?
So right now for MLC, the only treatment is towards using anti-epileptic drugs. So these patients have this epileptic seizures occurring to them. So that is the only solution for treatment for now that they have for these patients. So talking about the impairment of cognitive abilities, that is still like much far ahead in time that can be talked about. So right now we just, in my PhD work, I'll be just seeing whether the correction of that particular gene itself is sufficient to alleviate the disease effects. And if that happens at all, I can then go forward to using that model for drug screening. And so talking about cognitive, so as I said also, these organoids, they don't have this cognitive ability yet. So it is not like a rule, there is no rule book to mention what is this consciousness, what is not, in terms of these 3D structures that are grown. So when that is finalized, we can then think about studying that aspect.
The next question is, from Sonam Swarupa. What is the chances of CRISPR being used in prenatal gene editing commonly, and will it be used to cure prenatal genetic disorders without breaching the ethics?
So, in my view, it's a strict no-no. Like the prenatal, like using CRISPR technology for babies that are like about to grow, because we don't know. So these CRISPR proteins, so these Cas proteins, they also have this, unfortunately, this feature of having off-target effects. So therefore, it is not used. It is not recommended for using on these prenatal based. So for screening it's fine, for correction it is not yet approved, so therefore it will breach the ethical guidelines.
Okay, so we move on to the next question, which is by Rashi Singh. What are the concerns over safety as the CRISPR-Cas9 technology is developing?
So in my own experience, the CRISPR-Cas technology is not as advanced as it's shown in the pop culture. So we are not still there where we can actually create monsters out of using these CRISPR proteins. So it is much in a very naive state. So talking about safety, for now, it is only the fact that if I am trying to cure a cancer, a cell carrying cancerous gene mutations that would result into cancer, probably due to the off-target effects of these proteins, I might impair other genes. So that is the only concern for now that is there. And therefore, we in our lab also we are studying this high fidelity protein called FN-Cas9 that is we have shown that it bears lesser off-targeting effects as compared to its classical counterpart SP-Cas9. So that's that.
The next question is from Sonam Swarupa. She has asked, now CRISPR-Cas9 is used for therapeutic genome engineering. Is there a chance that it can be used to increase the human capabilities and intelligence with genome editing in future?
So yes, that potential is there. So as we had mentioned that people would want to explore these high pedigree features that are there, and they would want in future to have all those features in their child, probably blue eyes or high IQ or good looks or whatever. So that potential is there, but that is all in that is like just part of this the talks of concern ki it might happen, or will it be good enough for us. So therefore the ethical considerations are there, so it is the stringency is there so that people don't go too far ahead with the technology at hand. So
Yes, ma'am, definitely. There are security issues, there are issues with babies and infants. So everything should be taken into consideration. We have another question from Keshav, that is, what has brought CRISPR-Cas9 in spotlight now when zinc fingers, TALENs and other genome editing tools still exist?
So basically, zinc fingers talents, so they are the work of protein engineering. So if I want to target a specific gene of interest, I need to engineer the entire assembly in a manner that each amino acid interacts with the nucleotide, specific nucleotides. So basically, the engineering is quite difficult. So when CRISPR-Cas system came into being, it is much simpler. Any person with basic molecular biology skills can learn it easily and can perform it, and that's what underlines this technology over the other ones.
I guess we're at the end of the chat questions. If anyone else has any other questions, you can please unmute yourselves and ask. We have ma'am and sir both here.
think everyone has understood CRISPR very well. We can ask a few questions now, exams.
Yes, sir. Not many more questions left. Also, it's our closing time now. It's 4 p.m. Okay, so we're at the end of the session. I would please like to request Srinivas to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sneha. We hope you have enjoyed the session. It is our pleasure to thank every person who helped make this event a success. I, on behalf of Genesis Club, registered under Student Activity Center of NIT Rourkela, would like to thank our speakers, Dr. Dibyajyoti Chakrabarti and Dr. Soumya Sarma, who spared time from their busy schedule to grace the occasion. Thank you, sir, and thank you, madam, for having joined us. A special thanks to all our viewers for registering themselves and making this event a huge success. Thank you all and have a great day ahead.